Well, who else is still coming back down to earth after this weekend in the Australian Championship? Is it just me? I'm sure it's not, because the Australian Championship quarterfinals have just happened over the weekend, and they were box office from minute one, from game one to game four. We're down to the semi-finals now. We have our four remaining teams: Marconi Stallions, Moreton City, South Melbourne, and Heidelberg United. But that does not tell the full story of a wild weekend, and we've had to bring the second ball back this week to sink our teeth into it. We could only go without it for so long, and apologies that it has been a couple of weeks since the last episode. There's been a bit of life stuff to sort out in the background, but that's all in the rearview mirror now. And even if it wasn't, nothing was going to stop me and the other Lachie, of course, Lachie Avil, who joins me today, Mr. Roundball, to discuss this particular weekend, because I mean it would have been good enough with the other three games on Saturday and Sunday, but and I'm not just saying that this because I had the privilege of being able to commentate it, but Friday night, Apia v Marconi, Marconi winners on penalties after a 20 penalty shootout, and a 98th minute equaliser from Apia. Lachie Avil, wow, 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 wow.
Wow, wow, indeed. I don't think it would have actually been possible for us to not get a podcast out of this weekend of football. I think if I just somehow found you at full time of the Derby d'Italia on Friday night and stuck a microphone in front of you, you could have continued on talking
Well,
about the mountain of football in front of you.
You would have had to get that microphone up to Mars, mate, because that's where my head was at the end of that game. It was just totally, totally crazy.
What did it feel like? Like as a commentator, I know we've talked a little about this personally, but it's hard to sometimes know when you're like witnessing like a famous quote about, news is that it's the front page of history, right? Like this is forever the first knockout game of the Australian Championship, and it's a derby of this fashion, and the game unfolded in such a spectacular way. Were you able to just sit back at any moment and appreciate just the kind of position you were in, kind of just watching history unfold in front of you?
It's a hard question. It's a hard question to answer. I think the one thing I could start with is saying there's this well known thing called the commentator's curse, which is if you say something, generally the opposite tends to immediately happen, or if you warn against something, then that thing is exactly what ends up happening. And I walked into the studio having, poured over 92 or 91 prior head-to-head meetings between these two sides, and noticed something that I, as a nerd, thought was quite interesting, which I immediately said to my co-caller, Atek Gensh, when I got in. She's like, did you know that these two teams have only ever gone to penalties once? Ever. Ever. And the minute I said that, he was like, you already know what's going to happen now. So there was a small part of me that was like, Murphy's Law is going to potentially strike in this game. But as to the actual X's and O's of how that happened, no, could never have predicted the specificities. And I think it was probably, I mean, you kind of have to separate it into the equalizer and the penalty shootout, right? The equalizer,
Yeah.
I mean, when it's a 16-year-old, like that's when it hits you that like, oh, this is something really, really special. And I'm sort of trying as best I can, to not let the excitement totally overcome me and allow it to sort of breathe a little bit and like leave a few seconds gap. But,
Mm.
you know, um, what I like about working with ATEC is like he's a pretty reserved, like calm sort of customer usually, and like makes really good, clear points, but doesn't do so like by losing his head or anything like that. Like it's a very measured on-air presence. But when the header goes in, I'm trying to sort of leave a 3 to 4 second gap to just let the moment sort of speak for itself. That's my intention,
Yeah.
at least. and I can just hear Atec next to me just he just yells like unbelievable, like
Yeah.
out of nowhere. And that was when I was like, oh, okay, well, if he's up and about, like this is something pretty major, um, because that part was just insane. Not least because I actually didn't think RP were going to do that. Like
No.
seriously, I thought they were absolutely cooked, because they'd lost two players with injury on the night, Franco Farinella and Presley Ortiz. They'd had a few chances, but they just, with the injuries they had, the absentees, they just seemed out on their feet after Marconi scored, and I thought, there's no way they'll do this. And then they did it in the most insane way possible. And then the penalties, I think it helped that the monitor that was available to us had the score bug up on screen, and so I once it got to like 6-6, I'm like, this is insane.
Yeah. New
And
territory.
I think it was once it got to that point, there was like a quite genuine, not sort of put on, like 6-6 or something like that I said, because I not saying it like laying it on thick. I genuinely couldn't believe the scoreline that I was reading, and the fact that Marconi survived these five must-score penalties before
Yeah.
James Hilton steps up and scores the winner. It's possibly one of the best, short of November 2005. It's one of the best penalty shootouts I think I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Um, and I'd be saying that regardless of whether I was involved in it or just sitting there at Leichhardt Oval in the stands. It was utterly, utterly mad.
I wonder if you can clarify this point as well. We were discussing it on the Ramble Australia pod, but because Marconi had that red card in regular time, does that mean that the sheets or like the people who were eligible for the penalty shootout, APIA are reduced down to 10 as well? Because my first thought in real time was, if the keepers are kicking 10th, who are the unlucky field players that have been determined as not good
Yeah,
enough to go ahead of the goalkeepers?
I could be wrong, but I do think that is the rule.
That's right. Okay.
I'm pretty sure that when you have a player sent off, the other team has to nominate one not to take. I actually can't, off the top of my head, think of who that would have been. And
But I guess like the
I'm
keepers
not.
have to be a part of that 10. So then it comes to them, and Hilton makes the save in the perfect moment and is very keen to get the ball straight away. And then he just decides absolutely power over placement, ends up getting pretty much both. And he just absolutely thunder F's it into the top corner to win the match. Just incredible.
Yeah. And somehow, James Hilton's reputation just continues to sort of to rise at the moment. I thought he'd sort of capped out in terms of that, and I think that was like the really nice thing about this game was just, when we look at the sort of benefits of this tournament of competition, why we're having it, what are the reasons for having it, what are the reasons against, what are we learning that's working well, what are we learning that's not working so well. One of the things, it's like a double-edged sword, right? Because there is maybe an argument to be made that all these extra games for NPL teams is pushing them to maybe a difficult place physically. Like, this was RP's 46th game.
Yeah.
They're starting to rack up injuries. I don't think all of those, some of those were the result of bad tackles, and are not necessarily down to fatigue or anything like that. But I think that's an argument that maybe some people would be within their rights to make, that this is a lot of football, for players, and they're starting to maybe feel the toll. But also, the other end of that sort of situation, this double-edged sword, is that it is affording players these special moments that they otherwise wouldn't have. And, I think James Hilton and Oscar Gonzalez in this game are two fantastic examples. Oscar Gonzalez did not debut for RP's senior team until the week prior to this quarterfinal. If
Mm,
we're talking about a normal NPL season here that ends in what, September, when Apia won the New South Wales NPL Championship, he's waiting another 5 months to even make a debut. We're not even, this is not a story. He doesn't
yeah.
have this moment. No one is talking about it. And I realize it's a very like binary way of looking at something, but how can you not see that? And this kid getting this opportunity that he otherwise wouldn't have. He would have just gone 5 months. No football, no nothing, nada. And maybe he makes his debut off the bench against a random NPL team next year or against a League One team in the Cup. And that's not to diminish the significance of those games or what that moment would have been, but what a difference it is when everyone's
Mm,
watching, when everyone's talking about it, and will continue to talk about it now. That doesn't exist. That doesn't happen for this kid, and the potential impacts on his confidence, his belief in his own abilities, um, other people maybe looking into him. Maybe an A-League academy
mm,
or a scout has watched that game and thought, it wasn't technically perfect, and there were plenty of times where he made a few mistakes in that game. But I've seen enough. He gets into good positions. He attacks the ball well. Um, because what is easily forgotten, because he did score the equaliser, is that he had a great chance a few minutes before that as well, which most people probably would have assumed would have been Arpia's last, that he fired into the side netting, but he got into, again, a great position. That doesn't happen without this competition, doesn't happen without this game. Hilton has had penalty sort of saving and shootout heroics. He's the goalkeeper of the year in New South Wales. Everyone, at least in this state, already knew that he was good. But now, this tournament means he has taken his reputation national.
yeah.
So
And
many.
even if you change the comparison slightly, like state league to the championship is one thing, but even the Australia Cup, like if you're a 16-year-old Gonzalez or James Hilton as a goalkeeper, would you rather have those heroics in the quarterfinals of the championship or even say the quarterfinals of the Australia Cup, assuming it's a MPL versus MPL lineup? I don't think it's unfair to say that in this circumstance, the Australian Championship quarterfinal almost holds more status because of the importance that the clubs and the fans are placing on it in terms of what the competition means. It feels like this is even a better opportunity than the previous one that they get on a national level.
And quite possibly, if it is NPL v NPL in the quarterfinals, it may not be getting a 4,000 crowd like this
Yep.
game did. So that is significant in its own right as well. I still think they're massive opportunities, but in the case of Hilton, I think the difference is that in the Australia Cup, your one good performance can be a flash in the pan, right? You can have a worldy round of 16 game, but your team gets knocked out, be admirable in defeat, and then no one's paying attention to what you do when you go back, or maybe less people are paying attention to what you do when you go back to your regular season of NPL, where you might not be as good as this one sort of high watermark. And yes, Hilton was particularly impressive in this game, but he hasn't just been impressive in this game. He's been
No.
impressive in pretty much every single game, with the possible exception of Wollongong Wolves the week prior, and in which case that was basically a mulligan for the entire Marconi team in some respects. But he was fantastic against Heidelberg. Like, he doesn't just have an ability to show that he can be a good goalkeeper on his day at this level. He now has a 6-7 week 6-7. I'm so sorry that I said that. I'm really sorry. 6 to 7 week track record that he is is a good goalkeeper, not can be, is a good goalkeeper. And the more
Yeah.
evidence he can give to the rest of the world that he is capable of performing at a high level, the greater his chances are that that may lead to something, potentially in the realms of full-time professionalism. Because let's not forget, we're coming around to December.
That
Marconi are
window's
gonna
closer. Yeah.
Marconi are gonna play the semi-final. They may well make it through to the final, which will be played on December 6th. Two more good games from him, and the A League transfer window is 3 weeks away at that point. about
Yep.
3 weeks, give or take a few days. Um, that is massive momentum. That again, if this competition isn't happening, it's just New South Wales knowing that there's a good keeper here who could be capable of doing more. Now, any person who is invested in Australian football knows. They all know. And I think that
It's
is really significant.
it's going to be so fascinating to see what the transfer window looks like in January. I'm going to be so interested because there are a number of clubs like that you can pick key positions where players need. And I'll pick one out that most people are talking about at the moment. Melbourne Victory need a goal scoring striker. They're paying $600,000 a week to Nikos Virgos, who has not lived up to expectations, so much so that they've started Jing Reese on the weekend in the Big Blue. If they're looking for someone else who they can bring in on probably cheap money, who's scoring goals for fun, why are they not looking at a Bull Duarch who's just knocked over 30 goal contributions in all competitions this season? That would
Mm.
be the perfect option if they are going to go down that route. And there's so many other players like Hilton from a keeper's perspective that because, as you say, they've had not just the 1 or 2 games in an Australia Cup run, but those 6 or 8, I'm going to say, games in the Australian Championship to build up and prove that form and have it be so much closer to a window while the A-League teams are playing, so they know exactly what they need. It's no longer just speculative. They know exactly what they need to fix their seasons. It's the perfect storm. So we talk about the gap between the NPL and the A-League getting closer together in terms of skill level, irrespective of the championship and its position this year. Are A-League teams going to be brave enough to take those chances on these Australian Championship players? I really hope so.
I hope, yeah, I hope so too. And it is an interesting question. And I don't think we're ignorant to, the reality that even if the players are good enough for that opportunity, it's still a significant step up, even
Of
if you
course, yeah.
disregard the level, just the very nature of going from 3 times a week, one game on the weekend to the 24-hour around the clock sort of life as a footballer. But also the timing of when this is coming in means that even if the A League teams decide, you know what, this is not for us, we've got other things to worry about. Well, there's a pretty significant intercontinental competition that's coming to this
Mm.
area as well. And if a
Yep.
James Hilton fancies himself to spend, 4 months in Tahiti, um, then that door is potentially open for some of these guys as well. So that I don't think that can be discounted. And I'm sure I don't have connections in Southeast Asia, but I'm sure they're paying at least a skerrick of attention in those sort of leagues to what talent
Oh,
is
absolutely.
is on
Look at
offer.
the likes of a James Tomalkovsky, who's over in Hong Kong at the moment. I know he's had a season or two on A-League books, but all that attention is come from his work at Metro Stars in South Australia and then over with the season in New South Wales as well. Like those players performing at NPL level are absolutely getting looked at and getting paid quite well, to be fair, by those Southeast Asian nations. So this competition is going to provide so many opportunities like that for sure.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, like even though this competition is not that, um, I think any Australian football fan should want the maximum amount of professional Australian footballers playing, wherever
Yep.
that may be, whether it is in Vanuatu or whether it's in Hong Kong or Taiwan or wherever the case, wherever the place may be. Um, Ultimately, everyone wants that. And so the more games players have here to press their case, to show their worth, then you would hope that the more professional full-time pros Australia will end up with, be they domestic or international. So that is a good thing, and I'm pleased for the game that it got this fixture. I'm pleased for the competition that it got this fixture. I'm pleased for the teams who put on such a fantastic spectacle. Um, Pleased for Marconi to come back, given the sort of week that they had and the amount of people who had sort of, I guess, written them off against Apia. But most of all, I'm pleased for these individuals who are seizing the opportunities, the extra opportunities that are being afforded to them, and we as neutral observers just get to be the beneficiary in what was
Mm.
just a fantastic opening to the quarterfinals, heaps of drama, and I think adding to that drama as well was one of the sort of big innovations of the week that we've yet to discuss, Lockie, the introduction of the Australian Championship becoming a guinea pig competition,
Yep.
helping
Yep.
with the trial of FVS, football video support, this modified coaches challenge version of VAR that's been implemented. And I think it took about 40 minutes for us to see its first use on Friday. There were many more across the week. What did you sort of make of its announcement, and what did you make of its implementation?
Yeah, so it's important to know where we've come from in terms of, Football Australia and FIFA and doing this trial. So we'll remember that Australia has always been kind of front of queue in terms of running these tests for FIFA. FIFA really like it as an area. They rate Australian officials very highly. The A-League was one of the first men's professional leagues in the world to have VAR as well. Clearly this competition was selected as a good place to trial FVS as well. We've only seen it at a couple of third tiers around the world and some FIFA underage competitions. So this is really a step up, which is cool for the competition. The clubs were really on board with it, really positive. And I guess it's important to note the reason this exists is to have some level of video support, as it is aptly named, for games that are not streamed or broadcast or have available finances to the level of VAR. So it is essentially VAR Lite Edition. We have our little FVS screen to the side of the pitch with an operator. And then obviously the teams have these challenges as a way to activate that review. Now, coming in at that angle of, it's a lower cost than VAR is great. It gives more accessibility. Teams love it because they don't want games to be decided by critically wrong refereeing decisions, which I think is good. But there's also this completely different element where the fact that we're spending less money necessitates the idea of coaches having the reviews. And I think that's actually the more interesting conversation, is the fact that the teams get to make their reviews instead of the referees just watching footage and deciding this appears wrong to a clear and obvious level, and therefore we're going to review the decision. And I come at this from a place of officiating where I think it's very beneficial in terms of the relationship that the teams have with referees themselves. And we saw a little bit of this in the championship this week. It is something that takes time. But from someone, and if you're a listener to the main Roundball Australia podcast, you'll know that I have experience officiating in a different sport, field hockey, but in a sport where we do use team referrals in high-level competition. And I can say, as someone who has officiated those matches, what it does to the relationship of players and referees is it requires both parties to have a little bit more humility when you're talking to each other and when you're actually interacting on the field, because the knowledge that, if a referee goes in either too arrogant or too overconfident about a decision they've made and it's wrong, there is very quickly going to be some feedback for you. And then if you are wrong, you're going to lose the respect and the trust of the players from the rest of the game. And from a player's perspective, the buck always comes back to, okay, well, would you like to review? And obviously there's the mechanism of going to the coaches, as the coaches hand it to the fourth officials. But essentially, if you think I'm wrong, you can review. So I think over the long term, when players get used to this system more, it's going to actually enhance the relationship between players and referees as well, which I think is really critical and really beneficial. And it also means that games don't get decided by really blatantly wrong calls, which I think is great that Football Australia have organize this to happen. Obviously, it's not as simple as just saying we're going to do this. They had to organize sponsorship for it. They had to make sure the planning and the referees were trained to do it as well. And then the teams get to benefit from a game of football where more of the high, impact decisions are made correctly. So I think it was a big success. I think it has a lot of, reasons for optimism moving forward. And I think it's great that the Australian Championship has this system available to them.
Yeah, maybe I'm gonna expose myself as just a perennial cynic here, and just a real ostrich style head in the sand operator who doesn't like any form of change. But I was a little skeptical, cautious when this was first announced, just owing to the fact that, and I look, personally, I think this is still a valid position on some levels, that part of the allure of NPL football for many people is its imperfection, right? Not just in terms of the players, but also in terms of the officiating. Like, it's not a fully professional, coherent system, and it doesn't purport to be. And you accept the good with the bad, and you sort of, know that whatever luck goes against you on one particular moment will invariably come back. And I kind of came away from the first 6 weeks of the championship thinking that that was part of the allure to this competition as well, as distinct from alternatives, and sort of thought, why would you want to sort of manipulate a product that is seemingly already functioning quite well and add something to an ecosystem that where it isn't necessarily, I don't know if valued is the right word, but I guess the point is I'm trying to make is we went through 6 weeks of this competition, and I don't think, happy to be corrected, that I heard anyone who was watching the competition going, you know what this needs? It needs video review. It needs re-refereeing of decisions. And that was sort of my position, maybe to begin with. And again, if the whole concept of VAR and video reviews is not for you, and you didn't enjoy it this weekend, I still understand that. But having seen it in implementation over the weekend, um, I don't know. Kind of, I wouldn't want it for, NPL for every single game, and I just don't. I think it would incur a cost that would make it impossible.
You don't want coaches handing you review cards as the commentator sitting up
Well,
top in the
I
gantry
mean,
with the review in front of you.
the sick few amongst you who may listen to another NPL podcast that I'm on,
You can name drop. It's okay.
that might once have heard on the NPL Victoria podcast that I mentioned that at some point along the journey, teams should be able to, you know, to have a stream of the game up on an iPad on the touchline and tell the referee to look at the footage again. Now that would only be a one camera shoot, but I think for off the, I said that as a joke about I think in May, and then here we are. But yeah, I wouldn't have it for NPL art, but I thought for this, it was a really nice value add, right? Like,
Yep.
at the end of the day, yes, this is about making sure that teams aren't shortchanged by decisions they feel are wrong or egregious in crucial games where there's lots at stake. But also, at the end of the day, without wanting to sound too American here, we are putting together a sports entertainment product, right? And the question you have to ask is, do your innovations provide more or less entertainment? And
Oh, the tension was brilliant, wasn't it?
my personal feeling was that not just the tension of your usual sort of check, but the actual drama of coaches conferring with their players and with their staff and with the referees and the hand signal and all that sort of stuff just added to the drama. And yes, there was extra stoppage as a result. And I think probably the one perspective that I'd be curious to know is that how does this technology actually affect the person in stadium experience? Not everyone who's at the ground has the benefit of a monitor with all the broadcast graphics and everything on it. People can obviously see the coaches signaling for reviews and submitting cards, but maybe it's not as clear to them, if there's no replay screen or anything, what it is that's actually being checked. So I'd be curious to get a perspective on the in-stadium experience of this.
Yeah.
But in terms of the broadcast product, while it did add additional stoppage to the games, what it added in heightening the drama of the matches it was involved in, particularly Friday night, um, I thought outweighed what it added to the game from a negative perspective, which is more idle time, more sitting around, more stoppage. Because yeah, the coaches conferring was fantastic. The sort of certainty of coaches and their facial expressions doing the finger
Yeah, the big
waving thing of
wiggle.
like, yeah, nah, that one's getting reviewed 100%, like the instantaneous of it. The coaches submitting their cards like they're cashing in their money in the money in the bank briefcase in WWE. Like, I mean, the money in the bank in WWE has should have told us already that this idea was a winner because people love to see other people just cashing in. You know that it's one of the great pops of wrestling.
I
And
just want to see the moment where the coach is handing over the card, the fourth official has got one hand on it, and all of a sudden an assistant coach behind them has seen a different angle and said, "Oh, actually, boss, maybe not." And I want to see the head coach try to wrestle the card out of the
yeah.
hands of the fourth official before they've completely taken it.
There was another really good one on Friday, which is Franco Parisi was holding both cards at the same time, like it was
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
dual wielding them, which I
He's
thought
like
was
ready to
also
go
good.
because the
Maybe
incident was right in front of him, wasn't it?
yeah. And that was another interesting thing is obviously the coaches are still, learning more about the purview of this and the incident in question was a potential second yellow and subsequent sending
Yep.
off of Franco Maya, who ironically enough did ultimately get sent off for a second
Yeah.
yellow. But the, you can see that Franco Parisi is trying desperately to like get this reviewed and not
Yep.
understanding why can we not have it reviewed.
Which
And
I actually think, given the different context between VAR and FVS, is like, if we take things back to first principles, the object of video review in terms of encompassing both systems is to try and ensure that the biggest decisions that impact the match are done correctly. Now, the reason why we have stipulations like you can't review a second yellow card is when the referees are doing it themselves, you have to have a finite list. Otherwise, the stoppages would be endless, right? But for FVS, the stoppages are limited by the number of reviews that the coaches get. But a second yellow to a red card still has the exact same impact as a red card on a game of football. The player still goes off and you still lose their players. So I think there's actually a very strong argument to say if the coaches believe that it should be a second yellow and it's high impact on the game for a red card, perhaps they should be able to review that in FVS. I don't know.
yeah, I think it's good food for thought. And I'm sure if you ask Franco Parisi, would I have preferred Franco Maya to be sent off 30 minutes earlier when we were still inside the 90, I'm sure he would probably
Mm.
have said, yeah, absolutely. Um, and yeah, that was an interesting one. Um, yeah, there were other sort of when the equalizer does go in, you can see that James Hilton is asking for the review card to be played. Of course, uh, initially I thought it might have they didn't play the card in the end, and initially I thought it was because Anton Mlinaric went over to explain that the player was onside and don't waste it or whatever. But then, of course, every goal is being checked, so there's no
Yep.
opportunity to play. I realized after the fact that there would have been no opportunity. The goal would have already been checked for those sort of situations. But yeah, all the sort of we want to see more emotion, more people, right? Rather than just mechanical footballers with no
Yep.
emotion. And I think where you get a lot of your emotion in a game of football is on the sideline. And where this differs from VAR is that because of the nature of the coaches having to submit it and everything, we just get more sideline. We get more of
Mm.
the emotion
Yep.
behind this as opposed to just like the invisible presence of VAR, I think harms its reputation, right? Because it has this almost like boogeyman effect over a
Yeah. Yeah.
fixture of football, where you're like, ooh, is it, there's a VAR check. What's
Yeah.
going to happen here? It could be
And there's
bad.
no involvement from the teams and the players, which is what people are there to see.
Yeah, and if they're in the stadium, they may not, unless they've conferred with the fourth official, know what is being checked initially or be able to see the incident in their own right or something like that. So it kind of hangs over the footballing fixture, whereas this, it's not like a ooh, like scary kind of is the Halloween monster gonna pop up out of nowhere? You're like, oh, are they going to submit the
It's on
card? There's
them.
like an
Yeah,
instantaneous tension. So yeah, look, I would be happy personally for it to be limited to knockout games. Like I think I don't know where FA see this technology going in the long term. There's obviously a discussion about potential implementation in the A-League women, for example,
yep,
and whether or not they see this as being a mainstay of the championship. But even if it was just for knockout games because of the five camera constraints of the technology or needing an extra amount of cameras for that sort of stuff, I'd be quite okay with it being limited to just these fixtures. But yeah, I thought it was a good addition, and I take this as proof that I'm not too proud to admit when I think I've got something wrong, and I think I got something wrong. So bravo to those who were involved, because to turn that over so quickly, um, especially given the clubs only found out on, I think it was Monday, Tuesday, the week of, having to explain to them how
yep.
it worked, having to integrate it into the broadcast. Um, it was a lot of work to do, and the fact that it went off seemingly without a hitch this weekend was, yeah, big credit to all those who are involved.
For sure. Yeah, and I think like what you said, game moments of importance in games that are importance, right? So get the penalties, get the red cards, get the goals correct in those big knockout games. There was even talk about the Australia Cup, right? I'm sure Heidelberg would have loved to have this system on offer in the opening minutes of the Australia Cup final this year. So those big moments, again, I agree. I don't think we need it in regular season games and probably not the NPL either. But for those big games where the importance is heightened, I think it's had a pretty good start.
Yeah, and the other part of it, just sort of looking at things from a putting my social media or content hat on for a second. It's brilliant exposure for the competition internationally,
Yeah.
because refereeing decisions are among some of the, like, you might look at the outside world of like social media and think, what's the stuff that does best? What are the things that people watch the most? And like, yeah, great goals and all that sort of stuff is part of it. Um, but refereeing decisions and VAR checks and all of that sort of stuff, where there is space and spectrum for debate, is among the most watched content in football in the world. And so to implement this, especially new technology that allows the Australian Championship a bit of extra slice of the media and video view landscape, can only be a good thing, right?
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I agree.
Yeah, yeah. So anything else from this game? We have spent a fair bit of time talking
No,
about
I
it.
mean we have gone pretty holistic, right, on the views. I think we can maybe move on to some of the particulars of the other games, but in terms of, again, just to bring this full circle to where we started, being the first knockout game of the Australian Championship, a competition we hope to have a big future. What a way to kick it off. It was pretty
Yeah,
special.
no, it did set a very, very high bar, and the other games had plenty of entertainment, albeit in sort of different ways, and that football video support system was not required for the big flashpoint of the follow-up game to this, which was Morton City getting a massive and important quarter-final win against the Victorian Premiers Avondale, scoring 3 goals, I think it was, after Brandon Lundy's second half red card that did go unchallenged, and I think rightly so. It was a fair red, but
Yep.
again, the goals, the football that Morton City put together, particularly in that second half, albeit with a man advantage, was super impressive. And uh, really, I think that the takeaway from a holistic perspective is what a massive result for Queensland football, and also for those who have, I guess, critiqued the New South Wales and Victorian heavy cultural influence of this competition of the foundation clubs. Of course, it's not really the foundation clubs' fault that they're the ones who are foundation clubs and just happen to be from New South Wales and Victoria. But I think it's really important that we do have at least, and indeed at most, one continued representative from outside the two main players in this competition going deep into the tournament.
Yeah, I think that more critically is the important part. The fact that there is someone outside of Victoria and New South Wales, right? Um, there was obviously a lot of conjecture when the foundation teams were announced that there was no Victorian or sorry, that Victoria and New South Wales were the only two states with teams. And we know the reasons why. And even again, in the utopian future where we have that open pyramid, you don't bar promotion and relegation because you're from a particular state. So the cream eventually does rise to the top regardless. But I think the fact that Moreton City have done so well, gotten out of their group, and then gone and beaten Avondale away from home, which given they were undermanned a little bit, and not just the red card as well, they had some really top quality players that they'd lost after the NPL season and then through injury throughout this tournament as well. But the fact that Morton have then gone on to win it, score some really nice goals, by the way, as well. That third goal was just a lovely flowing move. They were just toying with the Avondale defence towards the end of it. Is really big, I think, for just the opinion of, this competition is not just Victoria, New South Wales. This is a national competition, and teams from Queensland, Metro Stars made the quarterfinal. Unfortunately, they lost out. Bayswater City got very, very close to making the knockouts as well. Like, this is a national competition. So to have that representation in the semi-finals as well, I think is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Avondale have got their injuries as well, but I think, Avondale fans, Victorians may disagree with me as I heel off here, but I think that absentees to Morton City hurt Morton City far more, are far more impactful to Morton City than they should be for Avondale, who've got such a deep squad. It doesn't help that they had these absentees in like very specific positions, and Brandon Lundy is obviously having to play out of position in the centre of defence. But you know, Queensland is the place that Victoria extracts all their talent from, so it should be naturally expected that Avondale's squad runs deeper than Morton's. And the fact that they did what they did with those absentees, they lost their captain Declan Smith in this game to injury as well, and hopefully we get to see him back at least, but he was on crutches at the end of the game, so it didn't look good. So I guess there are a few concerns for how they shape up going into this massive weekend's matchup against Marconi. But it's a massive deal for the competition, as you said, but also for Queensland football, who, probably I think a lot of people in that state feel as though their competition, their clubs don't get the requisite appreciation that they deserve, the requisite share of voice in the media landscape that perhaps they deserve. Um, and this was in the NPL era, NPL Queensland's fifth win. If you look at teams from the two top flights of Victoria and Queensland against Victorian opposition in 15 games, they're first in 3 years since Peninsula Power beat Green Gully in the cup a couple of years ago. So that's a really massive deal, and it's not like Morton did it playing 10 men behind the ball or anything like that. They did it in a really impressive way that shows what the top teams in Queensland are capable of doing, and I think that's really significant for the state. I'd be worried if I were them though, because we have talked before about the significance of the cultural impact of the great nation of Japan to NPL football and how much it's given to. I think I said there may not be a nation who's contributed more to NPL football
Yeah,
than Japan.
yeah.
Look, I might have forgotten England, but whoops. But I think Japan is still up there, and Murai, Seita Murai and Keitatsu Kojima have been absolutely
They've
outstanding,
been superb.
outstanding, and off the top of my head, every single team with the exception of Marconi has in the semi-finals has a Japanese player who would be one of, if not their best player in the whole team. You have Uchida
Yeah.
at South Melbourne, you have Asahi Yokokawa at Heidelberg, and then you obviously have the two who I've just mentioned at Morton City. Probably each one of those players is in the top 2 to 3 in their squads, and they're adding so much to this competition.
Maybe it's like that front third prowess, like Japan to NPL Australian football is what Brazil is to the rest of the world in terms of
Yeah.
those high output attacking players.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way of looking at it. So yeah, it's a massive, massive result for Morton, and we're looking forward to seeing what they can do in the semi-finals when they travel to take on Marconi. As for the other one, it didn't go so well for the Metro Stars in their interstate matchup in the quarterfinals against Heidelberg United. It got off to a good start. They opened the scoring, only for Heidelberg United to add 6 unanswered goals, and this really remarkable juggernaut of a team, Lachie. It just continue to find a way to impress. I know they've had a couple of leaner weeks with I think 3 draws in a row against Marconi, Wollongong, and then South Hobart on the final day. And then to walk into this game where maybe things were looking not like panic stations by any stretch, but maybe a little bit more shaky than they used to, against a Metro Stars team who a lot of the coaches in this competition rate really, really highly, had only conceded 4 goals going into the knockout rounds, and to just absolutely batter them off the park
Yep.
and send them packing back to Clemzig in South Australia was just another stunning chapter in this stunning, I think now, 46 game season for them. It might even be 47.
Yeah, it just speaks to everything they've done right as a football club over the past year in terms of the recruitment, of getting the players in, the standards they set in terms of their professionalism for what is a semi-professional club, their training sessions, their health, like managing players through that longer season and still having them play those 46, 47 games, have all the success they've had, and then still go again late November to smash a team 6-1 who have had a good tournament in their own right. If a dip of form is drawing a couple of games in the group stage after progression is pretty much already secure anyway, then you're in a pretty good place. And you only have that level of success when consistently your level is just so far above everyone else. So the operation that they've run is incredible. They've made a Doherty Cup final. They have made an NPL Victoria final, obviously an Australia Cup final as well. And now they're just crushing through the championship. It is shaping up as, there's no other way of putting it. It's probably already the best season an NPL team has had. Like, in terms of competing in Australian football, like, what more can you do? I understand that they lost the Doherty Cup final. They lost the premiership race narrowly to Avondale, but just having such a long season and being so consistently good over a long period of time is incredible. And just like conceding 1 goal early and going, nah, stuff you, we're going to take no longer than 5 minutes to recapture the lead, let alone equalizing as well. It's honestly comical at a certain point, like how good they've been. I don't know. They're just such a good football team. They're most people's favourites going into this tournament. I don't think the way they played on the weekend did anything to shift those views whatsoever, but it sets up an absolutely massive game against South Melbourne in the semi-finals. 2 historic rivals, have plenty of history between them already. We talk about, the Derby d'Italia then getting put on a national stage, having this, Victorian Greek derby, then got put on a platter for us for the Australian Championship semi-finals, it's going to make for a hell of a game of football.
Yeah, it definitely will. And it's interesting. I was curious what the crowd was going to be on Friday because obviously it is great to see these teams playing in a national competition again. But when you have situations as we did on Friday, where it is two such familiar foes and a game that people have seen many, many times before, you wonder how much of a boost will this actually give to the crowd. I mean, that was the fifth time that Marconi and Apia have played each other this year, which is the most of any year since they were founded that they've played each other that many times. It's a record-breaking year, and yet the answer was the appetite was still massive and way
Absolutely.
up. I don't even think it would be ridiculous to possibly suggest that the crowd on Friday for their game in the championship would have been equal to the combined crowd figure of their four regular season or four meetings through cup and final. Maybe that's a little bit of a stretch, but I think it would honestly be competitive. So
Yep.
there is clearly extra value to this competition for the big fixtures, even if they are fixtures like the Greek derby that we've seen many, many times before. And I reckon, given what, yeah, as good as Heidelberg have been, their crowds have been, I think, a little bit on the disappointing side so far. Perhaps they've not had the, I guess, sexiest lineup of teams. Um, but
There has to be a fatigue factor a little bit there as
yeah,
well,
that
given the
that
season they've had.
that too. Heidelberg have become a big Friday night team this year. None of their home games have been played at that time. Maybe that has something to do with it. I mean, if you're a Heidelberg fan, I don't really know why you would not be turning up to watch this team every
Yeah.
week. They're so entertaining. They've scored 53 games in a row. They've scored, I think, 100 and nearly 110 goals now, which is approaching a club record season for Heidelberg. Like, what is there not to like? What reason would you have not to turn up? If I was a Heidelberg fan, um, maybe some people would accuse me of being one, given I do like to wax lyrical about them. But I'd be turning up an hour before kickoff every single game. It's just
Yeah.
guaranteed entertainment. And I'm sure this weekend will be no exception because as disappointing as I think the crowd's been in the championship, what they've shown through the years, what they showed in the grand final, in the Australia Cup final, is they do really turn up for the big occasions. And, you add a couple of extra thousand potentially, hopefully, onto, the crowds that South Melbourne have been getting at their games so far, and don't discount the casual interest from Victorian football fans in this fixture as well.
Yep.
That's a big deal. We saw it in the NPL Victoria Grand Final between Dandy City. Berg probably saw it in the Australia Cup final as well against the Jets.
Yes.
Don't
Yep.
don't discount that factor too. Just one
Can I
small.
put in a rogue prediction just in this kind of section?
Sure.
I think it is very likely that this game gets more attendance than the opening night, South Melbourne against Sydney Olympic.
Yeah. It
6 and a bit thousand.
yeah. It wouldn't shock me. I don't know if I'm as brave enough to go that high as you, but I wouldn't. I don't think it's a crazy prediction. I'm not gonna
I I just
accuse
think
you of
that
being a mentalist or anything.
that neutral factor and which drove so much of the 10,000 to Lakeside for the Australia Cup final when Heidelberg took on the Newcastle Jets. The fact that this is Victoria versus Victoria, obviously Victorians will see that the winner of this game they will believe will be the favourite going into the final. I just think this feels like the final before the final to some extent. And if you're a Victorian football fan, there is no reason not to be at this game, in my opinion. So I think it's going to be a very exciting atmosphere.
And it's not like the Greek derbies of a few years ago where it's a real contrast of styles. These are two teams who really want to play football, and
Yes.
since Sinisa Kahadzic has come in, I think it's two games these two have played against each other have been epics. been awesome games of football. This one should not be an exception by any stretch of the imagination. I do just want to make one more, I guess, footballing point on Heidelberg. It's football, non-football. Just to talk about how well functioning, well drilled this team is. Obviously, one of the sad notes of their victory on the weekend was that John Anastasiadis had to sort of go to hospital before the game. He had sort of taken ill and took himself to the ambulance that was on site, and luckily they were able to take him to hospital to monitor him, and it seems like everything is all good now. But if we didn't have the inside track of Joey Lynch on the sideline having told us that, other than Heidelberg going behind early, would you have had any idea that
No.
this team was I know that, anyone of a Heidelberg persuasion will be quick to point out that the manager isn't the only person on the touchline, and of course, Nick Delagianis, their football director, was there. Savas Patikas, their assistant coach, was sort of running things, and they obviously do a power of work even when Johnny A is there. But it is still a testament to how well drilled this team is that they can lose this just crucial figure in their setup and in their system and just go about their business like nothing had happened.
Yeah.
That's without even mentioning the sort of mental toll that, being worried for the health of your coach going into a game like this could bring too, because, it happened so close to kickoff that he probably did like the team talk and everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're only finding that out before kickoff. So yeah, it was remarkable for them to do that. And as you said, it sets up an awesome fixture in terms of the Greek derby. Obviously, South Melbourne saw off NWX Spirit fairly comfortably on the Sunday. I don't know if there's too much we want to talk about from
The only
this game.
point I want to make on this game is, like, you talked about the shift in like style of football that we get from South Melbourne. Like 12 months ago, the Max Mikola long throw was seen as emblematic of like a lower league England Route 1 direct style of football that South Melbourne played. But now it is just an extra element on top of a very attractive brand of football that they have. It's just like an extra weapon in the corner. And he decided on one of their grandest stages of the season just to unleash like the final boss of a Max Mikola long throw. He was so far out for that assist to Ollie Laval. He was like a good 10 yards higher than the penalty box, if that makes sense. And he almost flies the ball directly into the goal itself. I think it was Noel Bernarda doing a little bit of clever blocking on the goalkeeper to allow Laval the space to just head it home. An absolute weapon. And then obviously Mikola goes down the other end in the second half and caps it off for a goal and an assist in the 2-0 victory. So special for him. But yeah, the big focus obviously is moving forward towards that Heidelberg game, which we know now is going to be played at Lakeside Stadium. So yeah, it sets up for a big one.
I mean, not to be too negative, but as good of a long throw as it was, it's so I the only thing that dropped my jaw more than how good the throw was how poorly Spirit seemed to adjust to the eventuality. Like Chris Marks gets totally sort of bewildered by it and thinks there should be a foul because there's a player in Noel Bernarda, as you mentioned, behind him. But like, he just stood there. He didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Like, he just stood there and held his ground. He's completely within his rights to do that. I just, like, South have this weapon. I don't think they could have defended that situation any worse.
Do they typically like send it to the far post like that though? Because like usually it's more of a either in the mixer or it's a flick on. Because you're never expecting the first header to be the shot at goal, right? I feel like even as consistent as South Melbourne do it was a surprise.
I think if you throw them like South does, you do, or or at least you should. You should.
Yeah.
Like I guess he was kind of coming out to punch it, but like it wasn't within cooey of the ball at any point.
No.
Like, yeah. Anyway, I won't spend too much time talking about that. As you mentioned, the final that semi will be at Lakeside Stadium. The other semi-final will be at Marconi Stadium when Marconi host Moreton City Excelsior. Now that is a slight. It is a bit of a left turn from what we all thought was going to happen and what was announced, which was that the semi-finals would be looked to be played at neutral venues. What do
Yeah.
you sort of make of the fact that that's seemingly not happened? I don't know if there's some sort of like foundation club clause that has played into this. I know there was for potentially deciding, or would have been if required for deciding the hostings of the quarterfinals, in that a higher ranked foundation
Yeah.
club would take precedence over a higher ranked finisher. But I don't know if that was the case for this. What do you sort of make of it?
Yeah, so my understanding was that neutral venue was the terminology used as well, which makes it quite odd. So that is one part of it. If they're changing their tune, then that's probably a little bit of an issue. In isolation, however, I actually really like the decisions. I think, Football Australia for the Australia Cup, for example, reserve the right to essentially determine where they want to host the final for I think they have a number of reasons, but the main consideration is like the good of the game, right? What is the good of the game determined by where we position it. And so in the ethos of the Australia Cup and allowing NPL teams opportunity, the decision was to host that final in Melbourne so that Heidelberg fans could essentially turn up, which I think was a great decision. And as we saw, got up to 10,000. I'm not sure if you would have actually gotten that in Newcastle, to be perfectly honest with you. So if I would have preferred that they came out and said straight away that we're going to pick the semi-finals and we're going to pick the final, determine on what we think is best. If you reserve that right, then straight up, then obviously you have the permission to do that. But I think Lakeside and Marconi is the correct decision to host these games. And I think that gives us a little bit of a hint to the final as well. I think if one of these teams wins it and the other loses, then I think it's that foundation club that wins it will probably host the final. And this is pure speculation as well, but I think it kind of feels like the vibe is, well, if they've given Lakeside Stadium opening night as well, then I think they might be leaning that way to a final. Even if it was South Melbourne, Marconi as well, I could see it leaning that way. Even if Heidelberg got there, to be honest, as well. Like if you're going to have it in Melbourne, it feels like the place to do it. So whether they may be changing their tune, is a little bit of an issue, but I would have preferred they just come out and said it. We're going to pick. We're going to pick them and we're going to do what we think is for the best of the game.
Yeah, I don't actually. This sounds bad. I don't actually care whether that stipulation was there or whether it wasn't there, and whether they've decided not to adhere to it, whether they've changed the rules, whether it was never a rule at all. I don't really care because the best outcome has been reached. It would have been
Yes.
like in the case of Lakeside and Olympic Village, literally where else would you have played the fixture?
Yeah.
For starters, like Amy's just why there would have been no point.
Yeah.
Then what? What's next? Neither of these
Maybe
teams, I
like
think.
Oakley is like the only
Yeah,
half shout in terms of facilities.
Oakley's the only place I can think of, but then you have to spend money to get that venue. Maybe it needs an extra scaffold for additional
Yeah.
cameras or anything. There's extra sort of considerations, whereas you have Lakeside that you've already done 5 camera broadcasts out of. You can do it for this game. Olympic Village hasn't done 5 camera for the championship game so far, far as I know, but it has done it for the Australia Cup. You've got 2 venues that are already made there. It would have been, other than Oakley, I think would have been the only passable venue in Victoria. But in New South Wales, I think it would have been a far worse decision. And I do empathise somewhat with Heidelberg fans who maybe feel a bit aggrieved about this. Certainly understand maybe Moreton City fans feeling a little bit aggrieved about it, but like Marconi are a foundation club who finished in the same position as Moreton City. There was never going to be a way that this was going to Queensland. And having it not at Marconi's home would have just been, I feel like, cutting off the fixture's nose to spite the fixture's face, you know? Like, if you have this at Kogarah, all you are doing is guaranteeing less people will attend for
Yeah.
like 20% more semblance of fairness, because it's still going to be it's still going to
Uh,
be a New South Wales crowd.
Yeah.
Most of the people who turn up are still going to be heavily Marconi, like, but they want to have it at their venue, and they've turned out, 2,000 plus at all of their home games so far. I imagine that this semi-final will get more than that. uh, Having it at Kogarah, having it at, I don't even know where else could necessarily have hosted it. I guess King Tom, Sydney United Sports Centre is down the road. Having it at Leichhardt, it just would have been just sabotaging the potential attendance figure
I
of
think
this game.
when it comes down to it, like the competitive balance, which is what a neutral venue is supposed to do, is just so far down on the list of priorities for this version of this competition. We don't have to go all out to ensure fairness. Like, to be sorry, but we don't. Like, if we would have had a draw then to put the places of the teams in the different groups, and it wouldn't have
No,
been two foundation and two premierships.
there's no need for a fairness doctrine. And I think there are some
No.
people who could maybe make the argument that the fairness doctrine in the first place was letting 8 other states who didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. 6 other,
Highest ranked or whatever.
six other football federations that didn't necessarily stump up the cash to be part of this journey from day one.
Yeah.
I don't, that's a bit divisive, and I don't want to say they should be grateful to be here or anything like that. I'm glad they're here, and I think it's a good thing, but I think it would have been better off. I think we're better off this way. Like, when you get to the big fixtures, you need to be maximizing everything you can do to build the biggest crowds possible. And if that makes
Yep.
things less fair, I don't know. I think, let's see the bigger picture here, right?
100%. Big
this is-
picture, competition. This is year one. This is a stopgap to hopefully something bigger. We have to maximize the competition.
Yeah, and it's we have this format for a minimum of 2 years. If we want more, how do you think we're going to get more? More people turning up, paying money, coming through the gates, and having it at a neutral venue in New South Wales. Like, it would have been super inconvenient for any Marconi fan who lives in Fairfield, lives in the West. Like, it's just a bit of a pain in the ass to get to Kogarah. Like, it's not a fun journey. I don't think as many people. I honestly think it could have gotten sub 1,000 people. That if it was at a venue, further east. So I'm spending a lot of time critiquing a decision that ultimately hasn't happened, but making the point to put out why I'm so glad that it hasn't happened. And I think the result now is, rather than last weekend, which through no fault of FA or the organisers, you had 2 great crowds and maybe 2 other crowds. This week is just going to be 2 games that look and sound awesome on TV, that anyone who hasn't been paying attention to the competition or has written it off will look at it and think, yeah, it'd be pretty cool to be part of that. Pretty cool to pay attention. It'd be pretty cool to be involved. And then, what happens with the final? Look, that is where I'll understand the fairness argument a little bit more if we get into a situation where Heidelberg are having to travel to New South Wales to play Marconi, even though they finished ahead of Marconi. But at the end of the day, if, like, this is written into the rules of competition that the teams have signed up for.
Yeah.
If you want hosting rights, Heidelberg, pay to have those hosting rights. Pay for the right to be there. Like, I think it should be fair that the clubs who have helped to make this a reality more than the others do have some level of inherent privilege, because the competition doesn't exist without them.
Yeah.
It can exist, no offense, but it can exist without Heidelberg, because another team would have come in to take its place. Now, I'm glad that hasn't happened, but that's how it works. So
yeah, I agree.
I think that's for the teams that are critiquing this. I understand and I get that there may be an element of fairness, and of course we can have this discussion next week when the final is confirmed, when the venue is confirmed. But my sympathy for Heidelberg in that eventuality does extend as far as, well, if you want special rights and privileges, then stump up the cash for the special rights and privileges, right? Like, if I pay for a season ticket at my football team, I don't feel bad for my mate. Is, oh, I can't get in. I can't go. It's like, well, yeah, I have the ticket because I
Bought the
paid
ticket.
for the ticket, right? Like, so that'll be interesting to observe when it comes to finals time. But the fact that they've made this decision for the semis, augurs well.
Yeah.
Augurs very well, I think. Yeah.
All right. I think we're good. I think that's been a good comeback.
Yeah, hopefully what we lacked in episodes for the last 2 weeks we've made up for with a big drop this weekend. It was a bit of a marathon stint for us, Lachie, but I think it was worth it.
No, 100%. It's been great. It's been lots of fun watching this competition mature. We got 2 big weekends left. I'm hopefully getting out to Lakeside on the weekend for that semi-final, which is going to prove massive. And yeah, just 3 games to go, and then we can reflect on the mammoth competition that has just played out in front of us. It's going to be cool.
Can't wait. And hopefully you're all looking forward to it if you've been listening in. And if you've enjoyed it, make sure to follow the Second Ball wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a comment, leave a rating. Let us know what you want to hear more of in the final couple of weeks of the Australian Championship. And head to rambleaustralia.com.au if your appetite for all things football hasn't been satiated just yet. But until next week, it is goodbye for now, and hopefully everyone has another fantastic week in the Australian Championship.